Good morning and welcome to the closing keynote of Her Do You 2021. I'd like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of healing and peace, and to resist oppression and actively seek social justice, we recognize the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute tribes, and all of the original indigenous peoples of the land upon which the University of Denver stands, and to honor the fact that these land acknowledgements are put in place not only to recognize the people whose lands we are on, but to acknowledge and commit to the fact that none of us want to continue that history that we have inherited. Let's please take a brief moment of silence. All right, good morning. My name is Tally Thomason. I am the chair of the Women's Coalition and chair of the Her Do You Planning Committee. I'm very excited to be bringing you this closing keynote after a wonderful week of programming with a few more programs to follow today. It is my honor to introduce our first presenter today, the poet Janna Farooq. She is an African-American Muslim spoken word, visual, and jewelry artist. She's also a wife and mother of 5 children. No matter the medium, she pulls her creative inspiration from God and the inherent goodness that we all possess. Her writing is focused on justice and our inward reality. Her visual work is heavily inspired by the global Indigenous community. Janna uses her work to advocate for many causes, from racism to domestic violence. She hopes the totality of her work will help the world remember God and realize that nothing is ever as bad as it seems. Please welcome Janna.
Good morning, all. I'm just going to get right into my piece. Some men stand tall and proud on the necks of the women in their lives, cutting off our circulation. To them, the pounding of our hearts is too boisterous, rebellious even, and these men do not like competition. They mistake everything for competition, even breathing. Surely they can't have a woman's heart beating louder than their own. With foot on neck, they try to convince us that the buzz we feel is from protection, not from the lack of oxygen. The buzz is from love, not from the violence we are experiencing, as if him stomping on our bodies is an assault, as if we are too stupid or weak or naive to know what is best for us. They mistake our kindness for weakness and our grace for permission. They tell us we should be grateful for the fires they set that burned down our homes, but gave us warmth and light. Just use the soot as eyeliner to look pretty for the cameras, okay? See, isn't that better? Isn't it easier to comply and make use of the wreckage that I have created instead of calling it what it is, garbage? Look at all of this material I've given you. Repurpose and reuse. You're in favor of the Green New Deal, right? Well, here's my carbon footprint. I've reduced it by standing on all of you at once. And isn't that what women do anyway? Make something out of nothing? This guillotine I tried to chop you down with will make for a great vegetable peeler. Why don't you just make soup for dinner from the weeds I made grow in your garden? And once we women prepare and consume our soup because we refuse to starve and die, he takes credit for his contribution. When we emerge from his rubble still alive and breathing and glorious, when we still bloom and produce fruits, he tries to claim our victory as his. He yells that it was his pressure that helped form us into diamonds. The audacity. Listen, women do not deserve your rage or violence. We shouldn't have to dumb ourselves down to make you feel comfortable. We shouldn't have to walk to our cars with keys in fists to feel safe. We should be able to reject your advances without fearing for our lives. Women are not your receptacles for your feelings of inadequacy. No matter how pretty or loud, unkempt, unlikable, outspoken, or smart we are, your fury is yours, never ours to hold and coddle. Whether we don a mini skirt or a hijab, whether we are an elder or someone with a disability, regardless of our sexual orientation or expressions of gender, we deserve to live and be exactly who we are in peace. Woman, I see you. You continue to bound over these impossible hurdles time and time again, with baby on hip, with wounds still open, with palms calloused over, but determined to remember God and determined to heal. You know the aching of your heart is just the expansion of your chest, widening your capacity for wisdom, hope, and empathy. The dirt thrown on you is preparing you to blossom. Yes, you have been buried, but it is not your grave, it is your flower bed. What a gift we are to ourselves, each other, and the world. I weep for the ones that cannot recognize this truth. Don't those men realize that our Creator knows and sees all? Have they forgotten that we all will be held to account? I do not know what else to tell the men who are hell-bent on upholding these deplorable systems of oppression and destruction. If God ain't enough for you to do better, nothing else will be. Just let us women bloom over here in peace. To you, your way, and to me, mine. Thank you.
I suppose it helps if I unmute. Thank you, Janna, so much. That was very powerful, and what a wonderful way to start this beautiful keynote conversation. Next, I would like to introduce Lynea Butler. She is a curriculum and instruction PhD student at the Mortgage College of Education. Her undergraduate exploration of Africana studies and political science led her to pursue a Master of Arts in Conflict Resolution at the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. From this exposure, Lynea is now interested in cultivating intentional community and transforming harm through restorative justice practices that are grounded in Indigenous ethos. In her free time, Lynea loves catching up with family, friends, taking walks, practicing yoga, drawing, jamming out, and reading. Please help me welcome Lynea Butler.
Hello, and thank you so much for that introduction. Also, Janna, for the beautiful piece. I'm so honored to be in conversation with Dr. Keesee and Dr. Alexander today. Social justice is a constant struggle towards liberation from detrimental circumstances. Women are crucial to these efforts because their perspectives offer broader insights to conflicts and possible reparative action. In the Black community, and I'm sure many others, the women are often referred to as the glue of the family. Mothers, grandmothers, revered aunties, sisters, and cousins play caring and connected roles in the lives of their communities. So it's only logical that they take this care and translate it into the labor towards justice for the collective. For example, over the past few years, we have seen an uptick in political participation by women and people of color, which is not by happenstance. The present barriers to justice create a deep desire to act, and today we get a chance to be in community with two women who choose to work towards peace in their fields. Dr. Tracy L Keysey is the co-founder and senior vice president of Justice Initiatives of the Center for Policing Equity, CPE. This critical position expands upon the core mission of CPE, Justice Through Science. She oversees all law enforcement relationships and program implementation. Additionally, she works closely with communities to ensure their representation and participation in the co-production of public safety. Prior to her return to CPE, she served as the first ever Deputy Commissioner of Equity and Inclusion for NYPD. As the Deputy Commissioner for Equity and Inclusion, Dr. Keesee was responsible for overall organizational development and implementation of the NYPD's Equity and Inclusion Strategic Framework. She also served as an advisor to the Police Commissioner on the implementation of accountability systems that monitor training, recruitment, employee opportunities, and complaints in order to help increase the organization's ability to attract and retain an inclusive and diverse workforce. She also served as the Deputy Commissioner of Training for NYPD, and during her tenure for the training with the Training Bureau, Dr. Keesee directed the implementation of the Paperless Police Academy, the expansion of in-service training capabilities through NYPD University, the restructuring of the of the recruit curriculum, the expansion of CIT and integrated tactic training, as well as the creation of credible leadership initiatives for UMOUS, just to name a few. Additionally, Dr. Keesee is the co-founder of the Center for Policing Equity, CPE, which promotes police transparency and accountability by facilitating innovative research collaborations between law enforcement agencies and empirical social scientists. The CPE also seeks to improve issues of equity both within law enforcement agencies and between the communities they serve. Dr. Keesee is a retired 25-year veteran of the Denver Police Department and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from the Metropolitan College, Denver, academic certifications in public policy and public administration, and a Master's of Arts degree in criminal justice from the University of Colorado at Denver, a PhD in intercultural communications from the University of Denver, and a diversity and inclusion certification from Cornell University. She is also a graduate of the 203rd session of the FBI National Academy at Quantico, Virginia. Dr. Keesee has published numerous articles across the variety of collected anthologies and peer-reviewed scientific journals. Dr. Apryl Alexander is an associate professor in the Graduate School of Professional Psychology at the University of Denver. Her research and clinical work focus on violence and victimization, human sexuality, and trauma-informed and culturally informed practice. She is an award-winning researcher, and her work has been published in several leading journals. Dr. Alexander has been interviewed by numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, USA Today, and NBC Nightly News, about her research and advocacy work. Additionally, Dr. Alexander is a community organizer with Black Lives Matter 5280 and a board member for the Colorado Juvenile Defender Center. In 2020, she was appointed to the Denver Citizen Oversight Board as well. So I am just honored to be here with you two. And before we get started, given the year we've had and the ongoing trials we see, I just wanted to check in and see how you two are doing today.
First and foremost, thank you for having me at the Her Do You conference again this year. For me, each and every day in this last year has been a roller coaster. The lows are tremendously low. And then we also have to remind ourselves in social justice and liberation work that we also have to center and celebrate joy. And so when we do have these wins and accomplishments, those are important in these social justice movements as well. So, today is that balance of both. Couldn't sleep last night, woke up at 3 a.m. just because I had so much on my mind, but also looking forward to so much that is happening in our community in these weeks to come.
Good morning, and thank you. From California, I should say, and I would share some of the things that that April's also mentioning. It is the tremendous highs and lows that really get you and how you rebalance. Today is one of those days. I think I'm a bit tired, and oftentimes you don't realize that till you get off a plane or you actually get up in the morning and you realize just how much the body absorbs from the work that you're doing. I think that for me, I ask this question whenever I am with women of color or if I see them on the screen. When I start my meetings now, it is the first thing out of my mouth. It is, how are you doing? And usually I can look in the face of people who look like me and they know what that question means. And so we take a minute to really check in and see how we're doing. And sometimes just to sit, because oftentimes we're moving so fast and we don't get to see each other that often, that we don't often take the moments to just take it in. And it's very hard to do on Zoom. I miss being in the space where I can feel the energy and feel when somebody is low, because I think that's what we miss, the ability to sort of reach out and hug one another and say, we're gonna get through. So today this is my alma mater. So this always reminds me of a journey that was, it was a lot. So just to be here and to be in community with Apryl and not being able to see her in person and only get to see her lovely face on that cover of the magazine that my mother loved, by the way. So, but today is a good day.
It's beautiful. And you two look beautiful on it, by the way. But I guess just with handling those highs and lows, because I think just within the Black community, the people of color community, like death has hit us a little harder. And so that is something to deal with on top of what we're seeing in the news. And so I wanted to move us in this direction of just gaining a better perspective of your motivators. What keeps you going through those lows, and what inspired you to get into the work, but also what keeps you going?
I know for me, it's always been community. I changed majors into psychology because of community, that I was doing some volunteer work with survivors of violence and quickly started learning about the stats, learning about the barriers that they faced, learning about how sometimes the justice system doesn't create a system of justice for them. And that has motivated me across time. And it's been various communities. I've moved around a lot. Both of my parents are military veterans, Air Force veterans, and then I moved around a lot for schooling. And so for each community that I've stood with, just making sure that I embed myself in that actual community and learn about what are the struggles of that community, what are the strengths of that community. And that has kept me going. Community has given me ideas. Community has centered me and provided me support and nurturance at different points in my life. So when I talk about what keeps me going, it is community. I know this talk is centered around social justice, and social justice work isn't isolated one person sport. It's a team, and you need that community to be there with you in order to thrive. So I think kind of those motivators are the people around me, my support systems. I work with a lot of youth, and they inspire me and motivate me each and every time I'm interacting with them, because they come up with new innovative ideas that I'm not even thinking of, and they truly will be our future. So I think that's what keeps me pushing through in these really, really difficult times.
And I am too a military kid. And you learn to adapt really fast when you know you're the new one in school every year. So, I can appreciate the skill sets learned from doing that. But I would say probably my main motivation, is community, is also family. As I look at my faces in my grandson, my granddaughter, and the work that's yet to be done, and the face of my 80-year-old mother, who from the South had to endure. And so we all have sort of that centralizing way of keeping ourselves grounded. And also my work, though, stems from my history in policing and responding to communities where I was not the person that they needed at the moment. And that was the thing that really sort of, first of all, jarred me, but also made me understand very quickly that we are approaching, the needs of a community very differently than we do anybody else's. And so really trying to figure out, what is happening, what is going on. And so that has been the driving force. I think youth, and I'm old, so I'm a grandmother, I'm old. What I love about the youth and what I love to be in that space is to hear not just the hope and the energy, but to watch something new being created and championed and lifted, and how they lift one another. And I'm going to speak specifically to Black women, to young Black women who do this unapologetically, whether it be through the spoken word like Janae did, or whether it's music, or whether it's in the streets, at the tables. So watching them and being able to support in a way historically that would have not been acceptable, because we were so busy sort of bending ourselves and contorting ourselves in order to get to the table, in order to get to be heard. So to be able to support in a way, to be able to step back and say, here's what I can do for you. And, as I tell my niece is 25 and everyone else is in, my role is to stand back and make sure, one, nobody hurts you. Two, to make sure I can bail you out when you need that. And three, to just open up that path. So if there's something you need to get to that people will not allow you to get to, that I've been around long enough, hopefully I can do what everybody else has been doing throughout the country. And that is make a space for you and step out of the way and let you step into that and do what you need to do. So it is those things, I think, for me the most that just keep me, on the straight and path. And then just, I think, recognizing and living life, because this is why we're here. And we own that. And we always own it. We've never debated it. And so making sure that we stay true to it is important.
I'm so appreciative of where the conversation is going, because I do think that there is a lot more intergenerational support within the Black community. Also, I'm a military brat too, so this is just beautiful. Because I think that kind of formed me. I moved 8 times by the time I was 13, and you just see the world in different ways, even in one country. So, but from what you were just saying, Dr. Keesee, can you both explain or explore the value of authenticity and equity work, especially just showing up as yourself is in spaces where your community might not already be represented, so you might be the only one?
Please go first, Dr. Keesee.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. And it's Tracy, please. It's not. Oh, wow. What I love about this question is it is about being authentic, and you will learn really quickly if you're not. Let me just be very clear. And so, but what's an interesting piece about this question is that authenticity, depending on where you are from a maturity perspective or where you are in your world, in your life, it looks different sometimes. But for the most, I think it is really about trying to stay centered and stay true. So when you show up in those rooms, that is being very keen and listening to how people are talking and how they're talking about other people and the issues and what's going on. And there's always a conversation about, I'm not the sole representation of all Black and brown people when I'm in that room by myself, but sometimes, yeah, you are, and I'm okay with that. And you have to sometimes be okay with it. And when you get to that point in your life, you know that you can seriously step in or step out, because I've been in meetings where I'm like, I'm out. This is not about the business. This is not about action. This is not about doing the work. And my time is precious. My energy is precious. And I'm not going to stay in here while you all are trying to work something out. Usually it's because people haven't gotten to where they need to be. And so I think, showing up that way, for one, for our people, for Black and brown people, I sort of can tell, I have the radar that, and not in a mean way, but, if it's about, and I usually get this with my own generations. Let me be clear, I always speak for myself, and I'm 57. We've been sort of conditioned in a way to show up in spaces that are not necessarily authentic, but make other people feel comfortable. And so, shedding that is a process for a lot of people still, right? And when we watch the events, it not just happened this past summer, but for our entire lives, to have to go into a boardroom or into a space and, trying to deal with not just what you're dealing with as an individual, but what you think people are thinking about what you are dealing with is a lot. It's a lot. But what I find is when you come truthful about what you're feeling, what's happening, it really pushes other people to do that own self-reflective work. And I tell people this, people who've worked with me around me will hear me say this: I'm not your therapist. That's the first thing out of my mouth. That's not what the doctor means. I'm not your therapist. And you're going to have to figure out ways to find the information, one, that you're seeking. But for people who look like me, it is one of those things where it's exhausting. And it's something that, really needs that support piece, but you have to come with it and figure out ways, how do you find that other support of others who do the exact same thing, who step into that space every day, unapologetically about who they are, why they're there, and what needs to happen. And so, yeah, and I always lift that up because we talk about intergenerational, and for some people they're not there yet, and it's difficult. And it makes sometimes them feel some kind of way and feel uneasy, but that doesn't keep me from doing what I need to do. And usually I'll get with people afterwards and try to sort of walk them through. But you have to. We don't have time for this anymore. You got to show up and get ready to show out. So.
Yeah, I would like to echo everything that was said, but also recognizing for a lot of people, there's a road to authenticity. There has been so much in the term professionalism that is racialized and gendered that we often have to break down at some point in our path to being our authentic selves. A lot of people have heard the words respectability politics, and I've talked about that you have to perform, especially as a woman of color, in a certain way to be accepted, even though, like Tracy just said, you're going to go in these spaces and they're not going to accept you anyway. or people are doing the code switching. Let me change how I speak. Let me change how I position myself. Let me wear the uncomfortable clothes that aren't about me in order to feel accepted, and you're still not accepted. And so I think over time you start learning about the importance of authenticity as a part of your self-care, as a part of just being your genuine self. And then people have to catch up later. You have to kind of be you, think about your own values in different spaces. And then like Tracy said, sometimes you have to walk out of that space for your own protection, for your own security of whatever group that you represent, because it's not healthy and it's not safe. So I have been challenging a lot of young people that I work with, some of my grad students, to rethink some of this, that some of the things that come around professionalism just aren't gelling with your authentic self. Each and every year, it's a student with the purple hair that says, do I need to dye it before I go on a job interview? And I'm like, you could, and you could go into that job, or you can keep your purple hair. And if they accept you for your skills, your merit, your abilities, your talents, that's even more meaningful. And that's hard because that's taking a risk, right? But who are you, and who do you want to be, and what do you want to represent, and what do you want to stand for? And I think for myself, I've had to come more into that again across my journey, because again, people may not accept you regardless of kind of, even if you are accommodating to their ideal. And so, you know, I've been trying to challenge myself more to do this. We're in a culture sometimes right now of a lot of toxic positivity. No, I'm not okay. This Derek Chauvin trial is going on. That's preoccupying my mind. There's all sorts of other things in our community, the anti-Asian violence, that's all preoccupying my mind. So it's not my authentic self to come into this meeting and present as if I'm okay. That's not authentic. I'm not okay. I'm not okay with what's going on around me, and we have to recognize that and name that and be real about that. And I think that's especially important for people of color and women of color. You know, there's all these names of check in on your strong friend, this and that, but what does that actually kind of mean? Are you actually caring for the people who are struggling and suffering, and naming it and acknowledging it, and then thinking about a course of action? So for me, again, I'm just encouraging people to kind of think about what is their authentic self, who do they want to be, and what do you want to represent in your work? Because I think that's just so important in your journey to social justice, to liberation, and just being who you are and having that legacy of realness.
Thank you both. And I'm just thinking about how when you are authentic, it does cause discomfort because people aren't ready to receive it, I guess. And so can you both just explore that before we get into how to stay balanced while doing all of this work?
So, I mean, it's an interesting thing that you would just say people aren't ready, right? And I think April sort of pointed to this, and so others' uncomfortableness around your realness. You really have to think about how much of that you want to take on, if any. And I say you can't. And I want us to circle back to just a little bit, right? So what I find with especially young Black women is this imposter piece, right? You come in here and you think that you're, one, not supposed to be in this space, and two, that you're not acting in ways in which, you know, are supposed to conform and condone whatever it is you're supposed to do. And, you know, April mentioned this, so that tension of having to go in and do that is what will cause you the most stress and cause the most damage to you. And so part of that work is, one, really realizing and understanding your own self-worth when you walk into those spaces. And I think that as we sort of grapple with authenticity, you're the only one, you know, again, April said this again, spot on. You get to define that. That's you. Nobody else gets to tell you. And this goes back to, you know, the respectability politics. I love that, right? Of being loud, of being aggressive. It is who I am. You can label it however you want to, but it gets the work done, and you own that, and don't let anybody else do that. And I think what you're also seeing is systems that have pushed us into those spaces to be this way, right? We don't have options. April mentioned this, right? You don't go in as a Black woman, and we know this from the Hair Act and everything else. I can tell you when I first shaved my head, all the questions I got about that had nothing to do with the work that I was doing, and more concerned about that. And so it really tells you where people in their minds have situated Black women specifically around how we are valued, worth, seen, and how we're expected to show up in certain spaces. And so it's work, and it's work, always will be work. And even at this age, it's still work. And so I think that it is something that you just do not let people push you off that road. You get to determine it. You get to say, who you are, how you identify, and how you show up. And I think that's the most important thing. Hold on to that. Don't let anybody try to push you off of that, because that's where the problems really kind of get, for me, it's where it gets problematic for you as an individual person. So.
Yeah, and I'm also a first-generation college student, and that's one of my identities. And I work with a lot of other first-generation college students in being the only in the room a lot of times. So I was the only Black student in my graduate cohort, and they only took like one Black student each cohort year. So there wasn't a lot of us. And thinking about when you are looking around that room, I still remember my orientation day of looking around the room, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that person's from Yale, and oh my gosh, there's nobody else that looks like me, and all of the other kind of things that embedded in my mind as like that imposter, that other in that space. And just thinking about how we're making new spaces for ourselves. I actually didn't intend to go into academia and kind of fell into it. And when I'm in various spaces, people often make the remark, oh, you don't seem like a psychologist, or you don't seem like a professor. And a few years ago, some other psychology professors did a Twitter hashtag, "This is what a professor looks like," to debunk all of your stereotypes, your myths about what a professor looks like. And it mostly was women and professors of color in this campaign of, yeah, maybe we're different and we're shaking things up, and I do things a little bit differently. I center social justice in my work in a way that was not emphasized in my training. So being also, as yourself, being comfortable with some of that discomfort, that you are going to be different, and that's okay. We need you. Various fields need you. If you are this first or only, or ostracized in any other way, that needs to be represented. And I think that's part of this authenticity, that I think I'm finally at the space where I feel my authentic self in my role, in my career, in my body, as a person in community. And I'm hoping that more people will get to that kind of place.
Thank you so much. And we're just gonna go into so when tackling such impactful issues that can feel discouraging at times, and just dealing with the projections of everyone else in the work onto you, how do you maintain a balanced and healthy mind, body, and spirit that's grounded in yourself, right?
I have to say to people, you have to have your squad. Again, all of this work is not a solo sport. So you have to have people who have your back. So it is your family, it is your old friends. It is, if you can, finding colleagues who are there to uplift and support you and be your cheerleader. Having people in community, sometimes people outside of your field. I said, I don't need all professor friends around me all the time. I need to find others who are talking a little bit differently, and again, re-energizing me. So you do need that kind of pep squad to hold you accountable for your care, to be your cheerleader, to uplift you, and then you doing the same for them. It's also reciprocal. And I think that became especially important in this last year with COVID-19, with the racial reckoning and all the other stressors that are coming in our lives right now, that if you don't have supports, that really hurts. And Tracy opened up with this. This is weird to have this conference online, to not be able to see people and interact. We're really missing that. And I think that did hit a lot of people in this last year of sometimes we didn't appreciate what we had, to be able to hug somebody, to be able to just go into someone's office and chat for 20 minutes to just debrief. And so I think wellness is a part of community, in holding each other accountable for community. And then finding your own kind of self-care plan. What else do you need to do in order to kind of take care of yourselves? Whether it's hobbies, mindfulness, any kind of thing that helps you take care of yourself, making sure you're checking in with your mind, spirit, and body and doing that work.
Oh, exactly. You have to have your people around you. And it's interesting because you will get that text at 2 a.m. and you're not upset when you get it. You just have to get up. For me, I have to put my glasses on to see what it's from. So it's just one of those things where you get up and do that. But it is all of that and more. And so for me, my energy does not come from outward, it comes from inward. So I am the person that sits for long periods of time. I do meditate, I do yoga. And so for me, it is one of those pieces for, that I had to re-engage with because of COVID. Before it was sort of like spotty, I'll get to it when I can get to it. And then when you are closed down, you figure, one, you have a lot of time, and two, you need to do something just to keep that sort of on track piece. And so for me, the meditation piece became even more heavier. I am technically a quieter person, so that stays here. And I get that, I have to re-energize here where other people have to be around other people. And so I'm very mindful of that, because I'm also mindful that it may come off differently to other people. I don't really care about that, because that's what I need at the moment. The other piece of this for me too is being outside. It just, man, I tell you, not that I didn't love my husband, but it came close, because it was just like, I got to get outside. I just need to be in a different space than you, because you do realize how much your lives are intertwined with everyone else, and how much you need to see that. Even, your parents and nieces and nephews, and you never miss them until you miss them, right? And so it is one of those things where you need to, reading for me is big. Ever since I was little, I was that kid sitting in the library in the stacks, reading and going on, sort of these journeys in the mind. And I came over some books that I should have been reading a long time ago. And so the ability to have that moment where I could just sit and actually take something in and just watch and listen. And so it is important to have not just your squad, but it's important to have women around you. I'm going to be clear, because I have both, I have both, but it is those women who you can just say, or nothing. I can just sit on a phone and it just be quiet. And that's okay. So, but it's important. The balance is important. The food is important. What you eat is important. That's still a struggle for me, because I'm a kid that loves cake. So really trying to get those things in balance, and just being healthy, going to get those checkups, and doing things that we would push off and put second for everybody else. So all of those things become equally as important.
Thank you. And I actually kind of want to ask an additional question on this, just because I know you both are very into the data and history and numbers as researchers and analytical people. That can feel, I think, overwhelming too. So if you could just expand, I guess, on making sure that the mind is healthy. And I know all of it works together, but that is just something I think women of color, Black women in academia definitely deal with. So if you have any other things to offer there.
Yeah, I mean, self-care is also I wrote an article on this, and a few people didn't like it, but I said more than bubble baths and wine. That anytime you look at like the magazines on the shelves, they say self-care, take a bath, which I love baths, and drink some wine, which I love wine. But if we're talking about mental health, it is, again, taking care of your mind and spirit. Do you need to check in and see a therapist or some form of healer, or again, your pastor? All of that is important in taking care of your mental health and your overall health, because like you just said, they're interconnected. And so we can't forget that, especially in this time. Again, data, APA Stress in America study, 8 out of 10 Americans said they had COVID-related stress that reached clinical levels. So we just can't ignore that and make sure we're taking care of ourselves, in addition to everything else that's going on in our world.
Oh, 100% plus one on that. And I love Apryl. It's like, it's not all about bubble baths and wine, because you're 100%. It just isn't. It was just such a false way of having to do it. Something as simple as a crossword puzzle, right? I never knew they could be so difficult. I always thought they were not. And I think that for me, it is about, who do you talk to when you need that? I have a llama that I have weekly check-ins with because I need to. I increased those because I had to, because there are things that are still going on. Although we're not together, the world still moves and we watch it. And also it gave me an opportunity to do some deeper sort of historical digging on things that I just didn't have really time to do. And one of the things, so, I can talk policing and history, policing all day, but one of the things that I wanted to really sit with is, for example, the journey of Black women in feminism. And I had pieces of that, but not enough to sit down and really sort of sit with how that shaped my life, my mother's life, and that kind of, so really having the opportunity sort of to look and say, here's a space you should learn more about, and to do that. And that was for me sort of part of my therapy piece. And how do you get into those different things and here? So it is about keeping the mind sharp. And part of keeping the mind sharp too is reading about the works that, Black and brown scholars are doing. That for me was, digging in and going like, okay, let me check in on the community. And we talk about community, let me check on the community and see what they're doing, and see where you can support and step in and amplify. Because a lot of times it wasn't necessarily me doing the work, but me recognizing somebody else is doing the work, say, okay, let me push this out, whether we tweet it out, post it on the website, let's just lift up other people while we're doing that work. So that allowed for some balance as well.
Thank you. And I think that's a great segue into this next question about best practices you've adopted to promote equity and wellness beyond mere representation. So this could be in your work, however you want to interpret it.
Yeah, I think when I kind of first saw and heard this question, I was thinking about the workspaces, because oftentimes we're hearing this being the first woman, or the first Black woman, or the first Latinx woman, the first trans person, a lot of first. And while those are great, those are also sad for us to be in 2021 and hearing the first such and such. And so once you show up in this space, what are you actually doing with it? It's not enough to just show up and be like, yep, whew, I'm the first, I'm tired, I'm done. Are you reaching back and extending back to others? What are you doing to amplify other people's work? For myself, people are like, oh my gosh, you're everywhere. But I actually turned down probably a third of different opportunities because I might not be the perfect fit. So, asking me to be on a hiring committee for, LGBTQ position, I'm not an LGBTQ woman. So can I find another Black LGBTQ woman to represent on that committee instead of me? So, being really intentional about how you can help increase representation in so many different ways. How are you extending back? How are you actually amplifying the work of others? I said I probably need to get a little bit more strict on panels too. Who else is represented on the panels? It's just not enough to have just you as that almost tokenized voice on various kind of panels or communities. So asking those questions, challenging spaces. What are you doing in terms of equity? What is your pay structure like? We know women of color and women in general take on a lot of invisible labor. What is that counted for? Are they being compensated? And so there's so much work when people get into leadership positions that you need to be holding those systems accountable. That if we're trying to dismantle all these systems of oppression, we actually have to get to doing the work and holding people accountable and doing that once you get to that elevated status. So representation is a start, but it's not everything.
Oh, +1. I could sit with Apryl all day. I mean, that is exactly it, right? So part of this is work, and then part of it is sort of personal. So it is about the work, and it is what we do, right? But it's one personal that Phil Goff and I, when we co-founded the Center for Policing Equity, again, as April's mentioned, doesn't mean that you don't have issues in your own house. You better check your own house before you start talking about equity, right? And that was my big thing. And it is about how do we hire, promote, what does it look like? And as you grow really big, you can lose sight of those things. The other part of this too is about the firsts. And I'll just sort of, really quickly, like everyone else, of course, it brings you joy to see someone who looks like you, first of this, first of that, as Apryl pointed out. And for me, I'm sure that person was qualified before, but it's always about timing, right? And so they probably should have had this job years ago, but all of a sudden now it's appropriate that we need to put somebody there. And this again is not to take away from that, the achievement. And I have to explain this to people all the time. But the number one thing that always concerns me is when you begin to see all the firsts all at once, it's usually because there's a crisis. And then there's sort of this elevated expectation that they're somehow going to overturn decades and centuries of issues in a year and somehow fix it by having them be there. And the example that I always give, when we watch the insurrection at the Capitol, we have a chief that's fired, and we have a just more than qualified Black woman step into that space. And what hurt my heart is that, the expectations leveled on her right now to fix what they already knew were issues in this organization for decades. They had lawsuits around it, but the expectations laid on her to fix this somehow in 90 days, in a year, are going to be so out of control. And that's my concern. How do we support her? How do we get around her and say, okay, how do we help you get through what you need to get through and not leave you hanging because all of a sudden, not necessarily, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but timing usually sort of follows some of those things. And people have, the skill sets, and they should have had those positions decades ago. I watch our first female vice president, same issue, right? All of a sudden now she's supposed to fix issues at the border. She's responsible for what's going on, this same thing. And so the question becomes one of how do we step in and say, yeah, no, that's not how that's going to work. We will support her and get her to where she needs to be, but you will not levy everything you could not do on this Black body. And that's usually what ends up happening. And I think the other piece of this, when we talk about equity, it is in the work which we do every day, and how do we move forward. And when I look at the work that we just did in Ithaca, New York, and shrinking the footprint of law enforcement and moving it down smaller and smaller and smaller to where you can invest in those communities and get things where you need to be. And you have those voices that are centered in directing that work. That's what it looks like. But it's a lot. It's still a lot. And so it really is, how do we not just make sure those things are happening, but how do we make sure that I go across, as April said, people who are not in the space I'm in, and reach out, whether it's public health, education, economics. It's like we're all intersecting. And so we're all just reaching out and just putting a hand on the shoulder, just let somebody know that we're there. We got you. Nobody, and I tell young people, I got you. I might not be there in the room, but we're paying attention. We are absolutely paying attention.
Thank you. And what advice would you offer Black women and women of color who are in the earlier stages of their social justice journeys, and from any walk, like you just mentioned? People are getting into the fight from different angles. So what do you have to offer there?
Mine is always mentors. And I talk about this a lot. I didn't say mentor, I said mentors. So finding multiple people who you can go to for guidance, help, support, advice in both your professional and personal life. And keeping those mentors. All of my mentors from undergrad, graduate school, and on, I'm in contact with every few months. I check in on them, they check in on me. I just give them updates. This is what I'm doing and how I'm doing. How's your kids? Oh my gosh, they're in college now. And then, again, seeking their kind of support at various stages in your career. And again, when I'm saying mentors, you might need multiple for different things. So one might be on how do I tackle being this woman in academia. Another one, my male mentor, he helps me negotiate salary because he's good at that. And we know men are better at that. So he tells me what to do when I'm negotiating salary. From what does it look like to be within community, and thinking about my community mentors. There's so many people who don't have degrees, aren't academics, who I look up to for support. That I tell people that expertise, we always talk about that in terms of maybe experience and degrees, but what about people with lived experience? So I learn a lot from people in community by just sitting back, watching and listening. So that's kind of my biggest advice, is find the people that you look up to, the people you want to be, the ones that you admire, and reach out to them. For the most part, people are more than willing to help. And that guidance can be just so important in your development, in your journey, in just getting that support that you need.
I'm +1 on all of that too. And you know, the mentors are important. And I think one of the things I would probably say is you can't be everywhere and all things to all people. It's very tempting. It's what we do. And so, you know, you need to be mindful of your energy, your time, what you can do, what you need to learn, and what you shouldn't do. And it's okay. It's okay to say, no, that's not what I do. And I think, you know, what I like what Apryl said is you begin to bring in other folks who you think are more appropriate. I hold space for Black and brown female officers once a week. And I just listen. They just need somewhere to say something that does not get pushed back on them or is taken out of context. And so just really holding that space for them, whether it's one, two, or all of them come together, it doesn't matter. They just know that somebody's there, that space is there. And they can come in and do that. And I think seeking those things out is really important. That's why the mentors of all kinds are extremely important. But I would say, even as I look back on my younger self, is don't put all of that pressure on yourself. Because you have to grow into a lot of different things that you haven't even experienced yet, and you will. People can't force you into spaces that are not comfortable and that you're not ready for. And it's okay to say, I'm not ready, or this is not where I want to be, or this is not what I would like to do. And that's all right. No one is going to hold that and say you had an opportunity, but you didn't take it. You take those opportunities that feel right for you. And work into some of those. And so that's what I would say. I would say just, you know, be kinder to yourself. You have time, lots of time, and learn and step away when you can. Step away, you know, to do the self-regeneration piece and then come back. It's okay to tap out, as I tell people, tap out, take that time and then come back. So that's what I would say. Just don't spread yourself too thin. Try little bits of things, challenge yourself when you feel like it's a challenge you would like to try, but don't force anything that doesn't feel right.
Thank you both so much. This is just, I feel like you're sewing into me and everyone else watching, so it's beautiful. We're gonna move into the Q&A portion from the crowd. So to the audience, if you want to submit some, we're gonna start that now. So the first one we have here is, if you had unlimited resources and all the supports you needed, what would be the first world building thing you'd focus on?
So funny, because I asked my students this question and now I'm not prepared for it. I think would be just baseline. We need to revamp our K through 12 educational system. We just do not invest enough money in our youth. We know if we did, that would prevent so many different areas of social problems. So that means just education, making sure our youth are fed, making sure they're cared for, mentorship for them, and then just overall improvement in their education. So I want to start at the baseline. Let's take care of our babies and children. It would be where I would start.
That would be a tough question to be in your class with. It's like, ooh, hang on a second. I'm going to go to what I know, and that is how we define safety and what that looks like and feels like. I've heard, for people who know my work for, decades, I can go back and tell you that the system we have right now is not working. It never has. It's working as designed. And so it is to start over and talk about, what does it mean to be safe? And it also means, what do we mean to be safe, not just with us, but within our own communities? Because I do believe the education piece, the investment, all of that, all of us are intersected. The health. For me, it's health and safety. What does it mean to be healthy? What does it mean to have what you need? We're so intertwined in those spaces, and they're all related to how outwardly it shows up. That is from, whether you are taking baby formula because you don't have a job and you haven't had one, all of it. And so it is really understanding those intersections. And then for me, it is, my focus and what I know, and that's safety. What does that mean to be safe in that space, in your space, in your home? If you have one, and even if you don't, what does that mean to be safe, free? So that's where I would start.
Thank you. The next question we have says, related to these high levels of stress, since we know that transitions are also related to stress, as we begin thinking about the transition to physically co-located work after this last year, what do we need to keep in mind to move through the transition as thoughtfully, intentionally, and healthfully as possible?
I know DU just started a committee on this that started meeting yesterday. I don't know if I know the perfect answer. Obviously, I want us to be healthy and safe first. And so that's my biggest concern about returning back, especially again, as a Black woman, we know that COVID-19 is wreaking havoc on people of color and communities of color, that I just want to be very mindful and careful about all of our transitions back to work and school in this very moment. So once we kind of know more and kind of can guarantee that safety, then I can start thinking about everything else. I know with this last year and moving to remote work, that changed the game for a lot of things. That for a lot of people, we said, oh no, remote work isn't possible. We can't do this. And that created barriers for individuals with disabilities, for people who are caretakers of children and parents. And then when we were forced to do it, it all worked out well. So now it's going to be this discussion of maybe some people don't need to come back, and that would fit their lifestyle, and that would create more opportunities for other intersecting marginalized groups. So I want to be thoughtful about all of that before we transition back.
100%. That is, and we have a team of 70 folks. We're very concerned about what that looks like. And it's not just, being healthy, having, vaccinations, but making sure you have access to those things, and we give you the opportunity to do that. But I'm in 100% agreement with Apryl on this. We were told that we could not do these things because folks weren't comfortable doing those things, the people who did not want to make that transition. So I'm hoping we don't slip back to the way that things are and say we have to have you in the office, because we don't. We've already proven that we don't need you in the office. And if it does work better for your family and your lifestyle, you should be able to do that. And we should also adjust the benefits to support that. Because that's the other thing that I struggle with too, is that people say, well, if you're remote, it's not really like being in the office. So we're going to go back to these original definitions of what it means to be at work. And so that's my biggest concern, because it's just not true. The other part of this, though, for me is we have so many people who have different needs, and making sure we can meet those needs, whether you're in office or not in office. And I know that only because my daughter's doing it, knowing that, having adequate daycare still is an issue, even in the space, right? Making sure that you're here. I was asked, can you stay a little longer, Mom, so I can work? I can't focus. I can't do this and this. Once again, we're asking people to work and then to focus on trying to be caregivers, because women are still the primary caregivers here. And so for me, it is making sure that we respect that. But also, I think this is an opportunity for people to accelerate learning for people, because the one thing that I was always told too was that you couldn't get an education this way, that you could not get access to what you need as far as learning new skill sets and learning how to sort of incorporate new things virtually or remotely. And I think that's just not true. I think we have a whole workforce we could be doing different things with because of technology, and we should be looking at how do we support and bring people back into those spaces. But the other thing, though, that still concerns me is that although we are in these spaces, there's a lot of people who don't have access to these spaces. And so, really trying to figure out what does that balance look like? How do we do our work and continue to work with people who just will not show up on screen because one of means, or they just won't. This is not their form of engagement. We have an opportunity to really do things where we can be inclusive in very many different ways and defined very differently. And so I'm hoping that we do that. I know as an obligation as a person who owns a space to do just that. I do not want to force people back into an office they don't want to be in. And we have to be okay with that. And so it'll be interesting. And I don't want people to go back to normal. If I hear that word one more time, that's what was happening was not normal. This is not normal. And so whatever we come to 10, 15 years down the road, hopefully will be completely different and a new normal. So the rush to do this is not my rush. It's like somebody, for some reason, People who are uncomfortable with the world has changed want it to go backwards. And I'm just not interested in that. I'm really interested in taking the time to figure out how do we do this so it really works for people.
Thank you both so much. I feel like it's definitely, we need a new perspective on the situation. And I'm hoping more people adopt how you two are thinking, because I think patience is what the situation calls for. So the next question we have here is, where have you experienced resistance to expanding your approach to diversity and inclusion within your work? How did you and or your team respond to such resistance?
I mean, I think all of what we discussed last year is new for some people. So all the kind of language that we're using around anti-racism, abolition, decolonizing, that's striking fear in some people who want to abide by the status quo. And so one thing I ask my students, because they're graduate students in forensic psychology and they're working in the criminal justice system in all sorts of different roles. When they come to this program, I often ask them, what if you start learning that a lot of things that you were taught are wrong? They start seeing that the justice system isn't always fair, that people aren't always treated equally as they're kind of immersed in it. And I think we're challenging ourselves to do the same. People are getting uncomfortable with trying something new, thinking about reimagining different systems that would work, as we were just discussing with going back to work. Now that we've learned so much during this era where we were forced to try something new. So we're seeing that same thing with DEI work. It is making people uncomfortable, and it should. And we're asking people, challenging people to try something new, think in a different lens, think outside of your areas of privilege. And yeah, you get pushback, but it's where we need to go in order to have this transformational healing within our communities and within our country.
The language in some spaces for us may be new, but the actions are not. So I've been doing this for a while. And so this is what we're talking about, fundamental power shifting here. Folks who don't want to do that, and two are, April mentions, are afraid of what it looks like, because the way it's been wielded for all of my life, and it's been wielded in an equitable way, in a painful, in a deadly way. And so, often people who have been oppressors are fear of what happens when you liberate, right? Because you may do something to me that I did to you. And so so all of a sudden we get into these spaces where we need to have, healing. And we do, but not at your terms, because you're afraid of what's getting ready to come, right? So there's this power and shifting and controlling and still trying to control what is happening, because what you watched over this last election cycle is exactly it. You just watched it play out in real time, right? There is fundamental folks who believe that Black and brown folks should not be in spaces where they are currently occupying. And the fact that it's coming even more rapid is even more scary, because we have no control over what we want to have control over. So that's really what we're talking about here. And so as you get into those spaces and you watch it play out, it's in academic spaces, it's in policing spaces, whenever you go into it, you can tell, you can see it. And, and the thing I think I'm struggling with right now is we do all of this is, I have folks who I consider to be colleagues who I thought understood what was going on, didn't really understand what was going on until we started to take action. And then all of a sudden it was, wait a minute. So for me, it's beyond words now. And it's about action. And when you start making actions, you can truly see what happens. So it is still, again, it's not new, but I think what I love about this generation behind me, that it's on the table and it's not going back in, as we say, into the box, into the file drawer. It's not a checkbox that you took this class and you're good. It is not that. And that's what people are struggling with. We allow that to, to be enough. This is not it. And so it's going to continue to be difficult for a lot of people, and even people who look like me. So I don't want to just say it's somebody else. I got folks who look like me who are struggling here about what this means and what this is and what this isn't. So this is the world, and this is the way in which we're moving. And so it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully I'll see it in my lifetime, but I know everybody else will. So that's good enough for me.
Thank you. And your emphasis on action just has me thinking about growing pains and how that is very real in social justice work for people who aren't ready for that change. So, and that'll help us segue into this last question from the Q&A. What projects or ideas have you been working on that are coming up and are giving you energy or movement?
Probably two for me. Again, I'm a community organizer with Black Lives Matter 5280, and this summer we're hosting our 4th annual Freedom School. Again, for kids kindergarten through 5th grade, just teaching them Black liberation, teaching them historically accurate Black history, getting them guest speakers in the community so they can see themselves in different professions. It's my favorite thing each and every year. So if you know some Black identifying children in the community, please check out our social media on Black Lives Matter 5280 to find out how to register for that Freedom School. I think tomorrow we're hosting just some community forums just to get feedback from parents about what they want to see in that Freedom School. So just happy that it's at year 4 this year. The second thing, and I'll put it in the chat, is again, I got into this field to talk about trauma and the trauma that so many of our young people face. There's a lot of talk about the school to prison pipeline, just a set of policies that funnel kids out of their school system into the juvenile justice system. And activists are talking about the abuse to prison pipeline, that many of our youth in the juvenile justice system have faced abuse, and written about that, done a lot of research around that area. So last year I got a grant, a 3-year grant through the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention to start a trauma treatment program for justice-involved girls. This has been a dream of mine, and so we hope to be launching that program in the weeks to come. And again, what if we actually treated their trauma and healed them? And that would have probably prevented them from becoming in the system anyway. So check out a little bit about our new program in the chat article. And yeah, those are the two things that I'm just really excited about, and just forward momentum in this movement.
Oh, our girls too. That's what I mean. Not just our little Black boys, our Black girls too. My work has me on the ground in a sort of various locations throughout the country. Right now, what I'm excited about is the Ithaca, New York, and Tompkins County work, as we spent the last 6 months with community centered and driven, and actually going in and recreating their police department, which again is bringing in non-armed folks to deal with mental health issues, to service needs issues. We know that 42 to 4% of the 911 calls are not violent crime calls, they're social calls, people who need help. And so the ability to work with that city and county and to begin to do this work throughout the country as we, again, invest in those communities and rebuild safety in a completely different way. So we're very excited about that as we continue to do this work for us across the country, and not just with policing systems. I think, again, we have to remember, structural racism is in all of our lives. So it was transportation, it was restaurants, it was public spaces, it was parks, healthcare. So as we at CPE, as we do our work with our other intersecting partners to decouple that criminal justice and criminalizing those spaces, for us is the work that we do on the ground, and working through people on the ground doing this work. And I think people forget our violence interrupter partners that we have who go into those communities when communities are hot. Not police officers, going in and being able to talk with and talk to families about what we need to do and how we can support. That's the work that we're doing. And again, it is making sure, just like April said, we have so many folks on ground doing this work. We don't need people swooping into communities trying to oversee or take that work away. We should be investing and lifting up those doing that work. And so we'll continue to do that as we move forward, as long as I possibly can. So we're excited about that, and we're excited to share what we learn as we really do begin to peel back and let come forward what the communities need and the communities say, keeping them safe. So we'll be excited to share, have community share their stories around that.
Thank you both so much for this conversation, but also just the work that you do. This has been such an encouraging conversation, and I'm going to turn it back over to Tally now.
Thank you so much, Lynea, for that very thoughtfully moderated conversation. Of course, Dr. Alexander, Dr. Keesee. You know, Tracy, one of the things that you just said that spoke so much to me was that just because you don't see that the work is happening, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. And when people try to insert themselves into situations, it just muddles things and it prevents the real work. So I think this has been such a tumultuous year for us all between the pandemic and everything else that's gone on in our ecosystem and in our world, that the best thing that I have learned as a white woman is to sit back and pause and to listen. And listening to this conversation today was so powerful for me. So thank you so much. I know it was so powerful for our attendees as well. And on that note, I want to remind all of our attendees that our survey for the Her Do You 2021 programming is going to be going out at the end of the day. If you do respond, that gives us great feedback on what you loved, what we can do more of next year, and you'll be entered to win one of our alumna gifted giveaway items. And as we move into a space of contemplation, beginning to unpack everything that we've learned together over this week, I hope that you can all be gentle with yourself. And as we begin to unpack and learn how to, you know, I believe as Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. And I think that's my biggest takeaway from this last week of programming is just what have I learned and how can I be better moving forward? And it is my honor to introduce a video from one of our alumna, cellist Alicia Bauer. She's a performing, recording, and teaching artist in Los Angeles. After graduating from DU with a BM and a BSBA degree, Ms. Bauer received a full scholarship to UCLA for her Master of Music degree in cello performance. During her time in Los Angeles, she has performed for the film and recording industries, most recently including contributions to Star Trek Discovery, Empire, Moana, which is one of my personal favorites, and Spider-Man Far From Home. In addition to her recording work, Ms. Bauer can be seen and heard in live music. Highlights include collaborations with Bocelli, Chris Martin, Christina Aguilera, and Adele. This past January, Ms. Bauer debuted as a feature artist for the Deutsche Grammophon label with the album An Evening in Capital Students, Bach Recomposed. She has prepared a beautiful cello soloist performance for us, and I think it's great music to just sit, as Tracy said, to just be able to sit and unpack what we've done. So please stay with us to listen to this performance and enjoy the rest of your day.